Have you ever looked at your life and thought, this is just not how I imagined it would feel? Maybe you've been doing all the right things, quote, right things. Maybe you've been eating healthy, serving your family, loving God, and you still feel exhausted. You still feel anxious. You feel disconnected. You feel like you're just not where you ought to be. Today's episode is my story, but it's not just my story. This episode is about you finding your journey in my story. And by the end, I hope that you can see how God might already be writing your healing story too. Let's go. As much as I love review time, this episode has got so much in it. I'm going to skip it for this week. So, this is the part where I say, if you haven't left me a review yet, please go do it. I'm going to leave it at that. Okay? Because today's episode is a lot, and you might have to stop it and come back to it, and that's fine. Don't worry if you need to. I just feel this drive to share some things with you so that you can understand things. Because, see, there is a lot of value in knowing who a person is and where they came from, and there's value to knowing a person on the internet. There are so many people on the internet saying so many different things, and it's hard to know who you can trust. Are these people even like me? And so I really believe that there's going to be value for you in knowing who I am, where I came from, why I do what I do, why I know what I know, how I got where I am, because I think that you are going to be able to find your story in my story as well. Sometimes you'll find yourself comparing your step 941, or excuse me, your step one to someone else's step 941. And you might think, well, I could never be her. I could never be where she is. I could never have that kind of either life or job or health or whatever it may be. But what you have to see is I was where you are. It's just I'm a few steps further down the road. For many of you, I'm older than you. I've had many years ahead of you. And so in my story today, I want to share with you details that I hope will help you to see that we're not all that different. I want you to see yourself in my story. I want you to see who I was and how I became who I am today. I want you to see that I'm not that much different than you. We all have different roles to play in this life. So maybe, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be a midwife one day. Maybe you are. But more so, the steps of change, the steps of growth, the steps of getting off of the wrong path and shifting to the right path. That the right shifts can get you where you need to be, and that God is in the whole story if you'll let Him be there. If you've ever wondered why doing everything right still isn't working, I want to tell you my story. You might be in the messy middle right now. You can't quite figure out where you're going or why, but I'm going to tell you that you just need to keep going. God isn't done with you yet. Back in the, let's see, late 90s, no, I graduated in 2000. That gives you a hint. I'm 43 now, but I graduated in the year 2000 from high school, started college. So we're in the 2000s now, and I'm just a young lady trying to make my way. I was brought up in the church, but not really in a particularly spiritual way per se. We were just like, you go to church on Sunday, right? That's just what you do. I did the things that everybody said were what you're supposed to do. I did things the way that everybody did them. I went to high school, went to college, got my career. Mix in there a healthy dose of military for good measure, which really kind of makes things a little fuzzy for a young lady in the world. Back in school, high school, I can remember that I played sports. Like that was kind of who I was. I played basketball was my main sport. I also played volleyball one year. I played golf several years. I played softball several years. So I was always playing sports. I lived a long way from my high school. It's about an hour drive. So I was getting up at crazy early hours. Of course, then it was an academic magnet school, so we would have a lot of homework. So after going to school all day, playing sports, either having practice or games or whatever, getting home late, probably eating whatever fast food restaurant that I wanted that day. That was basically my diet, was whichever restaurant that I wanted, because I was an only child of a working mom. It just made sense, right? We didn't, my stepdad, he was a police officer, and so he wasn't home at regular hours. And so me and my mom would just run through wherever and get whatever and eat and live, right? I ate a lot of junk, ate a lot of fast food. I remember my breakfast oftentimes either being number one, and ironically, this is back now. I saw a sign the other day, but at Burger King, I drove right by Burger King on the way to school, and I would stop and get those little Cinnaminis because I thought they were good. And they were, but there's a whole lot of sugar in them, right? But they're back at Burger King. I saw that the other day. Ha ha. Would not eat those probably for anything at this point in my life, but I digress. So I remember either eating that, or I remember a lot of days eating Pop-Tarts out of the vending machine at school. I remember eating, I mean, so where I went to school, I mentioned that it was a long way from home, but it was an academic magnet school, and there were not city buses for that, or public school buses for that. And so I would ride the city bus home. And there was a little store not far from the bus stop that I would walk to, and I'd get one of the big old bags of Cheetos. I remember a lot of times my fingers were orange. And I would eat Cheetos on the way home from school. I remember buying Skittles in the like pound bags and pouring those in a Ziploc and taking those to school and eating those during class. So this was my diet in high school. While I was playing sports and all that kind of stuff, I was again getting up super early, staying up super late to do homework, and existing on no nutrition. Fast forward to college, I got a Navy scholarship. So I was still doing physical activity. I wasn't doing sports anymore, but I was still doing physical activity. But now I'm at college, and I did not gain the freshman 15. I gained the freshman 30. I weighed more than I ever had. Again, tons of fast food because I'm in college, right? I lived in a dorm. What else am I going to do? It's either cafeteria food, which was not particularly good, or fast food. That's what it ended up being, a lot. Fast food, pizza, that kind of thing. I would still do physical training type of stuff, but only what the Navy made me do or what I had to do to meet the Navy standards, and I hated it all. Didn't enjoy any of it, any of it. It was always a have to kind of thing, like I got to do this, I got to do that. And that was college. More late nights, more early mornings. I remember though picking my classes on purpose to try to not have early mornings. But then with the Navy, I still had to often. My, days from day to day when I would get up would be different. No circadian rhythm at all. And that was my college. I graduated college, got commissioned in the Navy, moved to Jacksonville, Florida, out on my own now, and still more easy food, just whatever was the easiest thing, just going along to get along. Didn't even think anything of it. Like, never thought that I was doing anything bad, really. Just, that's just what you did. Excuse me. One small glimmer of goodness that happened in all this time when it came to health is I happened to attend a Pampered Chef party of a friend, and as a result of that, I ended up signing up to sell Pampered Chef through a chain of events. Won't go into that part of the story, it's just not really all that relevant. But because of that decision, which wasn't health minded at all, really, it was just about making a little extra money and about stocking my kitchen with good stuff because the stuff I had bought at that first party was so cool. That was the beginning of me loving to be in the kitchen with the hope of someday cooking for a family. Now, I'd spent some time in the kitchen. My grandmother particularly would teach me how to cook. I remember calling her and asking her how to do different things, and then also cooking alongside her when I was a little girl. But it wasn't a regular thing, again, because of just the lifestyle that we had. There really wasn't much time for that. So I sold Paper Chef. I started in Jacksonville, ended up selling it also while I was overseas, came in and out of the company several times, met a ton of great people, got a ton of great kitchen tools, still love Paper Chef stuff. But that was kind of the beginning of me thinking about being in the kitchen, thinking about habits and that kind of thing. But again, it wasn't for health reasons. So my first duty station in the Navy, I worked in the emergency room to start. Then I moved to mother baby unit, which is kind of like postpartum, and we did couplet care there. We didn't have like a nursery per se. And then labor and delivery. While I was there, I cross-trained into working at a NICU out in town because I became, in my unit, the mother baby unit, I became kind of like the sick baby nurse. The only time we would have anybody in the nursery was if the baby was having trouble transitioning or sick. and I would be the one that would take care of them. And I loved that part of it. And so I got training out in town in NICUs and then actually did what's called moonlighting in the Navy. It's like an extra job. And so I went and got pretty good at taking care of sick babies, got really good at like IVs and that kind of thing. But throughout all this time, I'm being exposed to the medical way of doing things. And that's really the only thing I knew. I remember I remember one thought in particular. I was at my second duty station in Spain, and I remember, I think I walked out of a patient room and I thought, for hundreds of years, we didn't do this stuff. We didn't have epidurals. We didn't have Pitocin. We didn't do any of this stuff. And people still had babies. Huh. Well, I guess this is better though, because if it wasn't better, we wouldn't be doing it. And that was it. That was the end of the thought. I never followed it through. I never took it to its logical conclusion. I just stopped. And those thoughts came back to haunt me a little later in the story. So stay tuned. You're going to hear how that all kind of came full circle. I'll say the best thing that I did while I was in Jacksonville, as a little bit of a side note, but not exactly, is I found a church family where I was living. And to this day, those people are so special to me. It was a really strong, active church. It was a church that was predominantly African American, ironically. But I remember the first time that I walked in, the preacher was out in the lobby, and they are an excellent church at identifying visitors. Now, granted, it was easy to figure out that I was a visitor because I didn't fit in per se, at least not then. I did before it was over with. But he grabbed my hand, I was saying they were very good at identifying people that they didn't know, and they would always offer to study with you, always offer to teach you more about the Bible. And I thought that was beautiful. It was the beginning of really understanding what evangelism even meant. But the preacher took me by the hand that very first visit, and he grabbed my hand, and then there was this little short lady walking by, and he grabbed her hand and he pulled our hands together, and he said to her that I was now her assignment, that he was going to ask her how I was doing. He was going to check in with her and make sure I was okay. And that was the beginning of me being a member of that church, because of the way that he put me in a family so quickly. And to this day, I call her my Jacksonville mama. And it's so funny because she's about a foot shorter than me. And again, she's African American. And we would go out to eat and stuff sometimes. And people would ask us, how we were related or like why we were together or whatever. And I'm like, that's my mama. Can't you tell? Love her to this day. Just an interesting story though, because that was, again, the beginning of what helped me to understand about sharing the truth of God's word. That's where I learned. I always knew what I believed, but I never knew the why behind it. That's where I learned the why. And that is what that church, that congregation of the Lord's people, is what kept me grounded. And even though while I was in Jacksonville, I was making some really bad decisions, especially when it came to relationships, I always knew the right way. I was always being reminded of the right way. I never left the church. And eventually I got back to where I was supposed to be, because God is good and he is faithful and long suffering, and he was not done with me yet. So I got out of the military. Well, from Jacksonville, I went to Spain, was there for a couple of years, got out of the military because I knew that what I wanted in life really didn't match military life. I wanted to be a wife. I wanted to be a mother. And I knew even if that did happen to come along in the military, that it wouldn't look much like it should. It wouldn't look much like God's way, because it just really can't. It can't look that way with a female in the military, because the military life is just different. And I won't really go into that too much, but I'm sure you can probably draw some conclusions as to what I mean. But I'll say that it just wasn't the place for a Christian woman who wanted to have a family to be. And I had figured that out. So when I got out of the Navy, I was a little lost, didn't really know what was next. I just knew I was done with the Navy. And I first did a nursing contract in Memphis. And then from Memphis, I went back to Jacksonville. Again, that's where my church family was. That was the family I had stayed in contact with while I was in Spain. They would send me, this was before live streaming and all that, and they would send me DVDs of the sermons, so I would have something to listen to in Spain, because There was not a congregation of the Lord's people there. And so I go back to Jacksonville, where that family was. I got a good job. But around that same time that I got that good job, I met someone online and on an online dating site. And on paper, we seemed to be the perfect match for each other. Like all of our traits on that website lined us up. And so we started talking. We talked a lot. We started making trips to see each other. But I lived in Florida and he lived in Texas, like deep South Texas, like almost Mexico, Texas. It was a long way away. And because we were Christians and because, again, on paper, we looked like we were so perfect for each other, we moved really fast. Not physically, but just like the process of the relationship. So before you knew it, we were engaged. And that same preacher who grabbed my hand in the lobby and matched me up with my Jacksonville mama took me aside and he gave me one of the best lessons that I've ever had. And one of the best things he ever taught me that ultimately set me on the right path. He told me that I could not marry a man if I hadn't lived near him. Now, in no way was he saying that I should go live with him because that is sinful. But he was saying I needed to be in the same city with him. I needed to be around him on good days and bad days, not just on the, a couple days here or there where we could put on our best faces and, be in good moods for the weekend or whatever. You know what I mean? Like he wanted me to be around him regularly, like much more regularly. And so I told my then fiance that, and he agreed. But he's a preacher and I'm a nurse. And a nurse can get a job a whole lot easier and pretty much anywhere than a preacher can. It's hard for a preacher to get a job. And so, especially, by the way, a single preacher, that's a whole different story. But so I moved down to Texas. He arranged for me to live with one of the elders from his congregation and his wife and the elder's wife. And so that's where I lived for the months that I lived in Texas. That move and the events that followed that move eventually showed us that we actually were not the perfect match that we thought we were. And I'm so thankful for my preacher. Now, don't get me wrong, this man is a wonderful person. He is I'll just say that he's just a wonderful person. He is. It's just that we were not right for each other. And that can happen. Like you can have two really good people. That's a life lesson, girls. If you're listening, you're single and you're planning for the future, you might find a great guy and you might be a great girl. That doesn't mean you're great for each other. So through a chain of events, we ended up not getting married. I at first thought we were still that perfect match. He was the one that called it off, which I hated at the time, but I'm thankful for now. Sometimes God just throws 18 wheelers in your path because you are moving so fast and you are not seeing any reason. And the only way he can stop you is to do that. And that's what happened. And so, spoiler alert, we didn't get married. I moved back. That's not really a spoiler alert. That is the that's the story. I ended up leaving Texas, went back home, heartbroken, but God was working it all out. He had not forgotten me yet. And here is where the turning point started. One of you said you wanted to know what was the turning point. This is really where it started because up until now, health wise and job wise and all those things, I was just doing what the world does. This is where things started to turn. I went home and I started looking for something to do because I was a single female and I needed a job. And as I look back, it's really beautiful how God orchestrated my path, especially in this time. While I was in the Navy, I had worked for some terrible bosses, like awful people, just horrible backstabbing women who felt that everyone was a threat to them. Like they had no trouble stepping on the back of the little guy, which the little guy in the Navy is the ensign, like the bottom of the barrel officer. That's who I was. And I remember a couple of them just like really throw me under the bus so they could get somewhere. And, those kind of people that like nobody would ever choose to work for, but because they were in the Navy, they got positions and we had to work for them. And I remember thinking, I'm not working for these people anymore. Like one of them was so, in particular, I remember she was awful and I had to work for her at both duty stations. If she's listening to this, you're probably not actually that awful. It's probably my immaturity, but regardless, I didn't like working for you then, and I'm sure you knew that. So when I got back home, I just decided I'm not working for corrupt people anymore. I do not want to work for corruption. It is ethically, it just drives me nuts. I feel like I'm doing the wrong thing. I end up being mouthy and all the things, and I don't want to do this anymore. So I started trying to think, what can I do for myself? Like, how can I work for myself? But I was a nurse. Like, nurses can't really do that, right? Or at least I didn't think they could at the time. And really, then the internet was fairly young, relatively speaking, as far as like being able to work online. So I don't know if there really were all that many opportunities as a nurse per se. But I remember I went to the library. The internet would, again, it did exist, but it certainly wasn't the go-to that it is now. And I remember checking out a book that was something like a certain number, like 500 jobs you can do or something like that. I don't remember what it's called. And I was flipping through the pages and I came on this page that was about being a doula. I thought, a doula. That's interesting. What is a doula? I didn't know. Okay, so here I am have worked in labor and delivery for however many years at this point. I didn't even know what a doula was. All right. So I look it up and I start thinking, I think I can do this. This sounds like I already know how to do it, right? I already know labor and delivery, right? Because at this time I'm still thinking that the medical way is the way to do things. And yeah, women need support. Sure they do. I'll do that. This is the immaturity of how I'm looking at it. So I signed up for training. There was one coming up about an hour and a half from where I live. So I just signed up to go. And that is where the spark started. I think it was in Bowling Green, Kentucky. This is where I realized that something had to change and that I had been looking at the medical world wrong all along. Again, God was working it out. He got me in the right rooms with the right people to see the light, as they say. We all have our own way that we start to realize this, or at least all of us who are in this natural world now. We all have a way that we got here, something that pushed us that direction, something that made us realize that the conventional world's way is not all it was cracked up to be. It's not what we thought it was. And we have that moment where that moment that it all kind of just changes. It changes our path. And this was mine. This training was a doula certification training. And the trainer's name was Tammy. Tammy, if you're listening to this day, I give you credit for so much of my story. Tammy was awesome. She told me though, I remember her telling me, I think it was when I was signing in, she asked me, a little bit about myself. I told her I was a labor and delivery nurse. To my knowledge, I was the only nurse in the class. I told her I was about to start a brand new job. It was a PRN, which means as needed job at the hospital that was right across the street from the apartment complex where I lived. And she told me, I remember her telling me I wasn't going to last in that job. And I thought, I'll show her. Sure, I will. Like, what you mean I won't last? I've been doing this forever, right? She was right. Again, spoiler alert. So we start the class. It was a 2-day class. And the class was set up like in circle, like the tables were all circles, like the round tables. And there was, I don't know, 6 or 8 people at each table. And it filled up this room. And I went to the back of the room. And I remember that I was just a little bit, just realized I'm making a shadow on myself. Sorry. I was just a little bit further behind everybody else. So like nobody really could see me or my reaction through the class. Okay. And so she gets up there and she starts talking and I start to kind of like looking at her funny. I'm like, wait a minute. What is she talking about? And I remember specifically her starting to talk about the cascade of interventions. And y'all, my head started to explode. I could not believe the things that she was telling me. I remember sitting back there, and if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see like I was just sitting back there just going like this. Like, and she was up at the front laughing at me because she knew what was happening in my head. She knew what I was realizing because she had realized it in the past. She was guiding my path. And I started to realize that I had essentially been a part of everything that was wrong with having babies. I had been an accomplice to crimes, more or less. And it really, really started to bother me. So fast forward, I finished the training. I go start this job. I remember one room in particular going in, it was a midnight induction because midnight inductions, of course, are for the moms, right? That's really putting mom first. Let's get her really good and tired before she even has the baby. Again, I digress. But midnight induction, and I could not get in the room without having to step around all the people that this mom had brought that were laying on the floor. They had come to her labor before her labor even happened and were sleeping on her hospital floor. And I remember thinking, what is going on here? This is weird. And I remember thinking, why on earth are we bringing these women in at midnight? This is insane. They need sleep. They're about to have a baby. So, see, the wheels are starting to turn. And I remember another patient. I don't remember their names, but I remember another patient. I can even remember which room she was in. And I remember we used for induction there a lot of times a prostaglandin gel. We didn't use Cytotec or Cervidil or any of those things, but it was basically the same thing. It was just in a gel form. Remember, it was blue. Why we had to dye it blue, I don't know. But the medication was in a syringe and it was attached to it, or we would attach it to a tube, and then we would use our fingers to put them into the cervix and check them, and then we would inject or squirt in the gel to start the process, to try to start the process, I should say, of induction. And I remember thinking in that particular room, if I give this mom true informed consent, if I tell her about this medication, if I tell her the real risks of this medication, she's probably going to leave. But if I don't tell her the real risks, like I'm supposed to, because that's what I'm supposed to do is go over the risks and benefits, but we didn't really do that, right? If I don't tell her and something awful happens to her or her baby, and I get called to court or to a deposition about it, I won't be able to lie and say I didn't know. I won't be able to say that I wasn't aware of the risks that this medication hold. I know, but I'm just choosing not to tell her. In that patient, that room is what led me to quit because I realized I couldn't win. I couldn't tell the truth because if I did, all my patients were going to leave, and the hospital exists to make money. And when they start wondering like, why, how come all Lori's patients are leaving? They're not getting their inductions. I'm going to get fired anyway. But if I tell the truth, or if I don't tell the truth and it becomes a legal issue, I'm not going to win there either because I knew and I didn't tell her. And ethically, I couldn't do that. Ethically, I knew and I could not participate in this any longer. So Tammy was right. I didn't last. I quit. But I knew too much to stop at just being a doula. And I don't say that to be disrespectful to any doulas that are listening. Doulas are wonderful. But at this point in my career, I had so much training that I felt like it was a waste not to use it. I had so much experience, I felt like it was a waste not to use it. See, my background in the medical world and my background now as having that doula training and being a doula gave me insight into what was really happening. So God gave me a peace in this decision because I was moving back to his way. I didn't know that at the time. I didn't call it that at the time, but he knew that. And I was slowly but surely getting back to doing things and helping women do things his way. And maybe that's where you are right now. Maybe you're somewhere between faith and frustration. You're learning how to trust his process. Maybe you're in a position where you just kind of know something's not right. Ethically, it's not sitting well with you, and you just need to put your foot down in faith and decide that you're going to do the right thing for God, for your family, and for your body, no matter what. That is where I was at this point in my story. And the story's not over yet, but that's where I was. And I want you to see that you may be there, but just keep moving. See, this was the first of many turning points. At this point, I went back to midwifery school, or I went back to school to be a midwife. I enrolled in midwifery school. This was to get my master's of science in nursing because I had my bachelor's of science in nursing. I was getting my master's. There are lots of different routes into being a midwife. I talked about that in one of the very early episodes. The reason I chose this one is because this was the one that my post 9/11 GI Bill would pay for, and because it was really the only one that made sense to me at the time. If I had that to do over, I might do it different, but nothing I can do about that now. It's the way I went. So I found Frontier Nursing University. It wasn't called that at the time. It was like Frontier School of Midwifery and something. I can't remember. But now it's Frontier Nursing University. I started the way that school works is you do your didactic classes online, like all the theory stuff, reading the books, taking the tests, and all that kind of stuff. That's all online. And then you find a place to do your clinicals. And either locally or maybe you have to go somewhere to do them. It just kind of depends on what you can find. So I started classes, and y'all, I want you to know when I started classes, I was as single as the day I was born. Okay. And honestly, I was kind of starting to decide that was just going to be my story. At this point, I was, I guess, 29 or 30. I kind of was starting to think it was just too late for me. At this point in time, I was spending my weekends with my sweet grandmother. She would come over. I don't remember if she came over on Fridays or Saturdays or whatever, but she would come over and spend the night with me at my apartment. And she was my lunch date after church on Sundays. And it was lovely. And life was so much less expensive then because she was paying for all my lunches when we go out to eat. It was lovely. Um, I remember one Friday night in particular, though, I guess she wasn't with me on this particular day. And I remember sitting in my recliner watching something on TV, and I was so content, y'all. I was so okay with being at home alone. In fact, the thought of not being at home was annoying to me. I thought if I had to go somewhere right now, if I had a date or something, I'd be annoyed by it. I had just had two terrible first dates recently, and I don't remember who they were or much about them except for they were just bad. It was just bad dates. And I guess that's where you have to get, honestly. You just have to be content with who you are all by yourself. And I was. I was like, I kind of like myself. I kind of don't really like anybody else. Again, this was right after I'd had these bad dates. And so I'm good with being home. And ironically, it was not long after that when that whole picture changed too. So I guess I started midwifery school. I think I think I enrolled in 2011, but I think I started in 2012. And in January of 2013, on one Sunday morning, I went out to eat with my grandmother at a restaurant called Courtney's in Mount Juliet, Tennessee. It doesn't exist anymore, but if you live around here, you know where I'm talking about, or around there, I should say. And so me and my grandmother had eaten and we were leaving, and I saw this lady who was, I think, 86 at the time. And it was a lady I knew from a congregation I had attended when I was a little girl, or really into my teenage years. And her name was Pearl. And me and Pearl would always pick at each other. For those that don't know, I pick a lot. I play a lot. I like to pick at people, make fun of people. It's just kind of what my thing. I'm just a playful person. You don't see it a whole lot in this because it's a serious podcast. So that's kind of how I am. But me and Pearl were both like that. We would pick at each other. And Pearl's husband had recently, well, somewhat recently died. And she already had a boyfriend. And I had heard about it. And I stopped at her table and I said, Pearl, I said, how come you already got a man? And here I am, still single, ain't got a man. Ain't got no man at all. And she looks at me and she goes, I know who you need to meet. And she proceeds to start telling me about someone named Andrew. And this someone, she was best friends with his grandmother. She starts telling me about this new business he has and all this different stuff and how he just moved into his own house and blah, 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 and tells me I need to meet him. I'm like, oh, okay, Pearl, whatever. But, in my head, I'm thinking, that sounds kind of interesting. So I get home, and that day, I guess I went home I took my grandmother home who was living with my mom, and I was down in my mom's basement. And I got on, I guess, Facebook. It was already a thing then. And I looked up a mutual friend of ours named Kara. Kara, if you're listening, I don't even know if I've ever told you what an integral role you played in our story. Kara, I had known since kindergarten. Andrew, though, I didn't realize that I knew him as well, but he also had gone to that same congregation I had gone to as a child. We were just 2 years apart in age. And so, when you're a kid, 2 years is kind of a big deal. But I went to her page because I was like, you know what? I bet she knows this guy. And sure enough, I found him on her friends list. So I sent him a message, and that was the beginning. I told him, I was like, yeah, I know you probably think I'm crazy, but I saw this lady and she thinks we need to meet, but I don't know when I'll ever be around her for her to introduce us. So I thought I'd send you a message. If you don't think I'm crazy, write me back. And oddly enough, he was out camping and somehow got enough signal to get that message, and he responded like fairly quickly. And there's a whole lot to that story that I'm already running long. I'm not going to go deep into it, but I will say that he came home from camping, and then we went on our first date that Friday or Saturday. He went to church with me that next Sunday night. He never left. We got married the following July. But wait, before I go there, our first date was at Opryland Hotel. Again, if you live in Nashville, you know where that is. And the funny thing is, we went to Opryland Hotel first because there was a restaurant in there that he wanted to go to, but we walked all over the place and couldn't ever find it. Apparently, it had closed or something. So we ended up going to Chewy's over in Opry Mills. That was our first date. And at our first date, we talked about everything you're not supposed to talk about in a first date. We talked about religion, politics, exes, former relationships, all the things that they tell you to avoid. And remember those two awful first dates I told you, right? Told you about. I was fully expecting him to be the next awful first date. Like, I had no expectations here. So I was like, sure, let's just get it out of the way. Let's go ahead and run him off, right? But I didn't. It didn't run him off. And we ended up getting married the following July. That was 2013. Fast forward, AJ was born in 2014, Ruby in 2016, Abby in 2017. So life changed really, really fast. I had started clinicals back, just to backtrack, I started clinicals in that midwifery program while I was pregnant with AJ. And I've told you his story of his birth before, but I'm going to retell it really quickly. Again, I know this podcast is long. If you need to stop it, that's fine. I understand, but I think this all plays into helping you see all the parts and where you fit in and how this might be your story too. So AJ comes along while I'm in midwifery school. Oddly enough, he comes along while I'm in abnormal, whatever they called it, abnormal pathophysiology, something like that. But basically, the course in midwifery school where you're studying where all the things go wrong. Okay, not a good place to be pregnant, but regardless, so I'm studying all the things that go wrong. I had chosen a midwife for his birth based on proximity. I had interviewed several, but the one I decided to go with, I picked her because she lived like 5 minutes from my house, and I thought that was a great reason to pick her. Everything seemed okay. I didn't really love her, but it was fine. She was fine. But towards the end of my pregnancy, my blood pressure was a little bit high. Again, this is before any of my health changes really started. We're not quite there yet. So my blood pressure was a little high. I wasn't really eating well and that kind of thing. She ran labs, and I did not meet the criteria for preeclampsia. At the time, I was, again, in midwifery school, and I had several friends who had already graduated, and I was messaging them, asking them what they thought about my labs, and they didn't think I had preeclampsia either. And one of my friends, named Lisa, lived in Missouri. She was probably at this time, I guess, in her 50s, past having babies. And she kept telling, I was 39 weeks at this time, and she kept telling me I should come and have my baby at her house. She would take care of me. She had a new house and it needed to be christened because she was too old to have babies. So she couldn't christen it. She wanted me to. And I thought that was crazy. There's no way I'm going to Missouri to have a baby. But at 39 weeks, I called it crazy. But the drama continued. And it got to where I did not trust my midwife. I did not want her at my birth. I was dreading her being at my birth. And so we broke up. She was wanting me to get post-dates testing and things like that I didn't want to do. And I just decided this wasn't going to work, and so I fired her. And right about this time, I even found out that her license was no longer active. And while at this point in my life now, I probably wouldn't think that was that big of a deal, she hadn't told me. And it seemed very deceptive to me at the time. So it just seemed like, oh, okay, you're that kind of person. Yeah, I need to go to somebody else. So at 41 weeks, I broke up with her. I had a daughter. And I remember the day I was standing there in my robe. I think I was right on 41. No, I was like 41 and 1 or 41 and 2, something like that. And I decided that I was going to drive to Missouri to have my baby. My husband was on board at least enough to where he was like, yeah, okay, sure, go. But he does lawn care, and it was the last week of March, and we'd had some warm weather and some good rain, and so he needed to work. And I wasn't even in labor yet. First baby, probably going to take a while. So I was going to go ahead and go to Missouri. My mom was going to go with me, and then he would come when it was time. When we got there, I think we got there like in the middle of the night. Lisa put in a Foley bulb. We went ahead and started doing some things to encourage labor just in case I actually had preeclampsia, even though I didn't. So she put in a Foley bulb, which I'm not a fan of anymore, but at the time, again, seemed like a good idea. And it came out in the morning. And usually when a Foley bulb comes out, it means that you're at least 4 centimeters. But she checked me and I was only 2. So apparently I just had a really stretchy cervix and it had come out. I took some herbs. Me and my mom went on a walk, did some curb walking and things like that. Came back, did castor oil in ice cream, which, by the way, it's not a bad way to do it because I never had any of the castor oil effects, if you know what I mean. But the castor oil effects on my bowels, that is. This was again the end of March, so the NCAA tournament was on, and I sat on a exercise ball or a birthing ball and pumped and watched basketball and got things going. And while I was pumping, the contractions really started picking up. Things started really happening. I remember around we stopped pumping after I think I'd been pumping for a couple of hours. We stopped pumping and the contractions didn't stop. Around 8 o'clock or so, I called my husband and I told him I thought it was time. He told me he was exhausted because he had worked all day again doing lawn care in the heat, and so he needed to sleep, which I understood. But I was like, all right, fine, I'm gonna have to do this by myself. And so 10 o'clock comes around. I went and got in the shower, I think, with the birthing ball and just let the hot water roll over me. And then we went and decided to check me at like 10. And I was like 3 centimeters, I think. And Lisa had offered to give me Benadryl to help me sleep because obviously nothing was happening, right? So I've gone from 2 to 3. We're not really doing anything yet. But I declined because I hate the way Benadryl makes me feel. I hate the hangover effect that I get from it. And I am so glad that I did. Because very shortly after that, and this might be why I didn't ever have any of the castor oil effects, I threw up all that ice cream and everything. And that was from several hours prior, but I thought maybe I was just sick because I'm only 3 centimeters, right? So I must have just got a little bug or something. This is not good. I do not want to be sick during labor. Well, I wasn't sick. Apparently, I was already heading into fast and furious labor and maybe almost even transitioning because this is 10 o'clock. Labor started hard and fast. Thankfully, I didn't take that Benadryl because if I had, I would have had that weird exhaustion mixed with labor. But just 4 hours later, and 2 of those being pushing hours, my son was born in the water, in the foyer, because she had blown up a pool, in the foyer of my friend Lisa's house, with her husband as my photographer, because my husband didn't make it in time. I called him again, by the way, at midnight, and I was like, no, for real, it's happening. So he was on the way, but he wasn't there yet. With my husband, my midwife's husband, and my mom as witnesses and photographers. And it was beautiful, and it was perfect. And there were beautiful people there. Ironically, there was another midwife living in her basement at the time. So I had 2 midwives right there with me. It was the perfect story. Stayed there a couple of days, went back home, but y'all, it was the best move I made. Because had I gone to the hospital in Nashville, we all know how different my story would have been, the way they would have induced me, the things they would have done. Um, it would have been totally different. The outcome could have been totally different. But knowing that I could do it on baby number 1 set me up with a new confidence that I want you all to have. If you're a first-time mom and you're thinking, "Oh, I'll just go to the hospital just this first time. It'll be fine." Just know that you don't have to do that. And in fact, I would encourage you not to. That's another little off story. Let's hop back on the train of midwifery and the changes. Okay, so after AJ's born, I took a semester off. And when I came back, I had to get into clinicals, and I went to Galveston, Texas, to a hospital where people tended to go to get a lot of births quickly. I was going to do some clinicals at the birth center close to me, but they don't get as many birth numbers. And so I went to Texas to try to get a bunch of births fast, because that's the way to learn how to be a great midwife, right? And then come back. So I'm living in a studio apartment or condo or whatever. My mom was there with me for 2 weeks. My sister that was there with me for 2 weeks. My half sister, I know earlier I said I was an only child. That's a whole nother story. Not going into that here. But anyway, she came down with me for 2 weeks and to help me with AJ, who came with me as well because he was a newborn and I couldn't leave him at home. So here we are living in a studio apartment in Texas, away from my husband with a newborn. Awesome story, right? Great way to be a mom. This is not working, right? So I ended up leaving those clinicals early, came back home again, start just realizing that like all these things that I'm trying to make happen, they're just not the best, right? Came back, was blessed to be able to finish my clinicals at that birth center that I mentioned a minute ago. It no longer exists. The practice does, but the birth center itself doesn't. But at the time, it was there. When I graduated from midwifery school, I practiced there again, PRN. I mentioned that term earlier, which is as needed. When Ruby was born, I was still working there. My lovely midwives were some of my friends as well. It was just beautiful. I might have got that timeline wrong. I can't remember if I had graduated yet. Yeah, I had graduated because in my graduation pictures, I was pregnant and that was Ruby. So I had just graduated when Ruby was born. And I kept working there right up until when Abby was born in 2017. But then I finally decided to step away and stay home with my babies, which is where I still am. I decided I wasn't going to work outside the home anymore. I was going to be home with them. And even now, I do a lot of other things, but I fit it around being a mom because that's the first really job for any mom. It's being a mom, being a wife first, yes, but being a mom and raising children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. So more changes happened along that way, though. Hope I haven't lost you. Hope you're still staying with me because we're about to get to even more of the health stuff. I wish I could tell you where my skepticism about shots began, but I just can't remember. I know, though, that I knew enough about shots that none of my babies ever got any of them, none of the vaccinations at all. I just didn't feel like they were safe. I didn't trust them. And even though I hadn't quite nailed down why, I just didn't do them. But I wasn't fully convicted yet. I was pregnant with Ruby when I came across this documentary called The Truth About Vaccines. I watched that fully expecting it to be a documentary that was going to try to convince me that shots were actually good. But boy, was I wrong because it gave me all of the evidence and all of the reasons why everything I was feeling in my gut was correct. It reinforced everything that I was thinking, but now with medical backup. While I was pregnant with Abby, another of my midwife friends named Chandra posted a post on Facebook. When they tell you that Facebook won't change anything and you post things and it won't change anything, sometimes it does because Chandra posted a link about what happens to the conventional wheat supply right before harvest. And it disgusted me. I talked about this a lot in episodes 23 through 26 back in 2023, and also on Sue Becker's podcast for, I think, what's it called? I can't think of what it's called, but Sue Becker's podcast about real bread. And then in my episodes of this podcast, 23 through 26, you can go hear all about that. But that was the catalyst that started me into grinding my own wheat and starting to make my own bread. I didn't really know even what that meant. I didn't know how do you even get bread if you're not going to get it from the store, other than just conventional flour. What do you even do? So I started to learn all this. I went to a class at Sue Becker's store in Atlanta, Georgia, when I was 6 months pregnant with Abby, and I have been making our bread from whole grains that I grind up myself ever since then. And that was the first big nutritional change. That was the first big thing. But honestly, for me, I didn't know it at the time, but I think that that change might have actually exacerbated what was going on underneath. I fully believe that real bread is the only way to have bread. That whole grains are organic, whole grains, the way God intended them to be eaten is the only way to do it. However, all of those years, remember me telling you about all that fast food and all that junk that I ate for so long, all of that had done damage to me on a cellular level that I didn't realize yet. And my story was not over just yet. Still isn't. Story's still going even today. And your story isn't over either. See, I'd had 3 babies. I had breastfed them all. The last one I breastfed for 4 years. So that went on until 2021. So we're not that far ago or long ago now. But my weight just was not going back to where it was no matter what I did. No matter what exercise I did, no matter what kind of quote dieting I did, none of it. I weighed as much as I ever had. And I made up all kinds of reasons why this was. This was my new normal, right? Maybe my body was holding on to weight to make sure I had the reserves to make milk since I was breastfeeding. I'd always heard breastfeeding made people lose weight faster, but obviously that's not true. I convinced myself that that was all wrong and that this was normal. What I didn't know was that I had, over all of those years, created insulin resistance in my body. It was all brewing there the whole time. I was laying the groundwork for where I am now and not in a not good way. Again, remember the childhood, the teens, the 20s, all those years when I was just eating whatever was handy, going along to get along, going along with the culture, just eating what everybody else was eating. That diet and lifestyle inevitably had my blood sugar spiking after meals without me knowing it. I used to call it the itis. It was that sleepiness you get after you eat a meal, that tired feeling. Have you ever felt that? I'm sure you probably have. I always thought that was just natural. Your body's busy digesting, right? Well, yeah, your body's busy digesting, but when your blood sugar is sky high, that is the downstream effect, is you get that super sleepy feeling. I would eat at that time whatever sounded good to me. I never really thought that I was overweight per se. So I didn't really think it was a big deal. I didn't realize that all those meals were damaging my body by not feeding it well. And so the way this all works is that when your blood sugars start to go up after meals, I'm going to get back to why I think bread might have contributed, but when your blood sugar goes up and gets too high, your body releases insulin, then more insulin until it gets that blood sugar level back down. And as you become, as your body's having to create more and more insulin or release more and more insulin to deal with that sugar, because that sugar is so high, then eventually your body gets tired of seeing so much insulin. And that insulin's having to stay higher than it should to take care of the blood sugar. Insulin is just the vehicle that takes the sugar into the cells. Okay, it's like a little car that the sugar hops onto and then the car drives it into the cell. It's not necessarily bad in and of itself, but when you have extra, it then goes into its other job, which is a fat storing hormone. And so while my insulin was staying high to try to deal with this blood sugar because it was my body was becoming more and more insulin resistant, so the blood sugar continued going up because the insulin couldn't get the sugar into my cells like it was supposed to. So this insulin is always there at high levels and it's storing fat and it's making me not be able to lose weight and all this. My body became resistant to it. And the reason I think that the bread may have contributed to it. Now, if you don't have this damage done, I don't think that bread necessarily does this in and of itself. But carbs break down to sugar regardless, even when they come from good sources. Now, they may break down slower than simple sugars, but it still breaks down. And when you're already insulin resistant, like I was, it was making my blood sugar high because I was eating a lot of bread. I was getting a lot of nutrition, so that was good, but I was exacerbating my problem. And so last year, and I hope that didn't confuse you, by the way, too much. If it did, shoot me an email. I'll try to clarify it. Sometimes things make sense in my head and they don't make sense coming out. But last year, about this time, I was tipped off to this being my problem. I read a book because I'd heard about it on a podcast. The book was called Good Energy. You've heard me talk about it. And I had just opened up my own practice at that point to start attending home births. And so I ran some labs on myself, and sure enough, the lock was turned. That was the point at which I realized it all made sense. The reason I couldn't lose weight, the reason I had been carrying this baby weight, the reason I'd been feeling so sleepy and groggy and all these things in the afternoons, all these things, it all made sense. I was insulin resistant. And not only that, I was prediabetic, meaning I was well on my way to type 2 diabetes. And that sounds awful. And that sounds scary. I mean, when you hear the words like inflammation, insulin resistance, prediabetes, these things sound terrible. But it was the best thing I could have found out. Because at the age of 42, I had a target to aim at. I knew what the problem was. I knew what I was fighting. I started wearing a continuous glucose monitor. I learned what spiked my sugars so that I could then stop eating those things. Bread did spike my sugar. Some people it doesn't, but for me, it did. And so I had to back off on that or make sure I ate a ton of protein with it and start walking. Well-timed walks after meals prevents those blood sugar spikes. And I learned that about myself as I'm watching this continuous monitor where I get these spikes and then I start walking and it goes down. And that's because when you're walking, your muscles are contracting, your body or your cells can actually take the sugar into the cells without the insulin. So you kind of jump the whole insulin resistance part and you get the sugar into the cells where it belongs without having to have that insulin. And so I learned that. And so because of that, my blood sugar stopped being high, which kept my insulin from being high, which allowed my body to start burning fat like it's designed to do anyway. So I finally lost weight. And within 3 months, I lost 15 pounds. And those 3 months were October, November, December, which included a vacation, Thanksgiving, and Christmas, like all of the things that make you eat more. And yet I still lost 15 pounds. And to this day, I'm still doing that. At the time, I was walking 2 to 4 miles a day. Now I'm about 2 to 3 miles. The weight just fell off. And even now, in the last couple of weeks, I've lost a couple more pounds. I'm 18 pounds, or I think 3 pounds. I'm 18 pounds down total. My body tone is better than it's ever been in my memory, even back when I was playing ball. Like when I was exercising every day, all I'm doing is walking. I'm not working out. I'm not going to the gym. I'm not doing anything like that. I'm just taking care of my body the way God intended. I'm feeding my body well. I'm feeding a lot of protein, not a lot of carbs. I'm very mindful about what carbs I do eat, like real milk, real bread. That's great. They're so full of nutrition. I do not cut them out, but I have them in the morning with my large pile of scrambled eggs and then I go on my morning walk. And so I don't get that blood sugar spike. I get the nice steady blood sugar level so that my body can then fuel itself off of the nourishment from that meal and off of fat. It's a beautiful thing how God made us. I feel great now. I don't need afternoon coffee. I really don't need morning coffee either. Oftentimes it might be 11 or 12 o'clock and I remember that I haven't had coffee, not because I feel bad, because I walk by the coffee pot. I'm like, oh yeah, I never drank that. It's a beautiful thing. Even today, I don't think I finished my coffee till like 12 or 12:30. That was my morning coffee. That wasn't like me going back. And the reason I drink it is because I love it. And I put so many things in it, by the way. It's like amped coffee. It's got lots of nutrition in it. But I can go without it. If I don't have it, I don't miss it. I can keep up with my kids, no problem. You might have seen my reel the other day shooting basketball. Like I can do that with them. Doesn't wear me out. My sleep is regulated. I'm a morning person now. Side note, I'd always thought I was a night owl. Really, being a night owl is really dysregulated sleep and dysregulated cortisol, and you're having high cortisol in the evening instead of the morning when you're supposed to have it, and so you're all flipped around. But I thought that was just a night owl. No, my whole life I had been living this awful sleep schedule, and I had convinced myself that was normal for me. Really, it wasn't. It was just my body unhealthy. These super simple changes have changed it all. I feel better than I have pretty much ever. If you're still listening, I know this has been long. If you've stuck with me this far, first of all, thank you. But I want you to know that your story isn't over either. I went through those stages, all of those stages of my story for a purpose. I went through them for a purpose for my life, and I'm here today. But I went through them today for your life. God is using me now to help women like you find their path through all the noise, just like I did. Your health can be restored. If you damaged your body over many years of not knowing any better, you are just like me. I did the same thing. And I'm healing my body day by day, and I can help you do the same. I feel stronger than I ever have. I feel prepared for the day each day. I'm spiritually grounded. I'm emotionally whole. Despite many hard things that I've gone through, some of which I told you about, some of which I didn't tell you about, that can still happen even today, I know I can handle it. because I know God's with me. He's carried me this far. He's taught me so much. He's put the right people in my path to help guide me. And now He's put me in your path for some reason to help you in some way. I'm so thankful for that. This platform is such a blessing from Him. I will always be grateful that I have this way to talk to you about His love for you each week. If this episode resonated with you, it's because your healing is calling. And I would love to walk with you through it. I'll work with women just like you one-on-one. If today's episode spoke to you, if you're like, that sounds like me, I just need some help getting through these steps. I don't know what to do. If you're realizing that you've been trying to heal on your own and you're just ready for that real support, that's exactly what I do inside my one-on-one coaching. It is a deeply personal, faith-based experience where I help women get to the root cause of what's keeping them tired, inflamed, and out of balance, physically, emotionally, spiritually, all of the things. Together, we look at your labs, your lifestyle, and your heart. And we create a plan that supports how God designed your body to heal. Or maybe you've been listening and you've been thinking, I wish somebody would just look at my situation and tell me where to start. That's also what I do. We walk through your health story together. We look again at your labs, at your habits, at your hormones, and we make sense of it all from a biblical whole body perspective. It's not a program, it's a partnership. It is a mentorship, one that helps you to feel seen, supported, and confident in the body that God gave you. Psalm 23:3 reminds us that He restores our soul. 3 John chapter 1 verse 2 says, Beloved, I pray that you may prosper and be in health, even as your soul prospers. So remember, Mama, if you're not healthy, nobody's healthy. Your husband's not healthy. Your children aren't healthy. Nobody around you is. But the good news, God's not done writing your story. If you're ready to take the next step towards healing, head over to morriswellnessservices.com/apply and take the first steps and apply to work with me. The first step is just a discovery call where we just chat. I learn a little about your story, about you, and we see if we're a good fit. That's all you have to do. It's a very short, easy application. So if that sounds like you, if you're ready for that, head over there now, morriswellnessservices.com/apply. Or if not, please do meet me back here next week.